Good afternoon. My name is Tim Whittemore. I'm from the University of Michigan. I'm a student studying mathematics education. I'm working with my advisor, Dr. Mesa, and my fun, energetic colleague, Ann Cowley, and Ina Ko, and a whole range of other instructors and researchers to investigate the methods instructors use in their IBL classrooms. Today's presentation is going to be about assessment practices in particular. But before I begin, I'd like to give a brief overview of the topics I'll be addressing. I'll start with a description of assessment methods in general. I'll present the research questions that guided this work. Then I'll describe the methods and analysis of the study. There are some findings that I'll share with you and some implications that these findings might empower. And then after 20 minutes or so of me talking, I'll open the rest of the presentation to questions from you. There are many types of assessment methods, all sorts out there, but we can group these into two large categories: formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment can be thought of as assessment for learning. It allows instructors to adapt their instruction to meet the needs and the abilities of the students in the classroom. And the work that students are doing in real time is taken, and that's used to form a more productive session. Some examples include student presentations, class discussions, students working together in small groups. These are methods that look at the progress of learning rather than summative methods. Summative methods can be thought of as assessment of learning. They measure the evidence that students have achieved something, they've reached a goal. So summative can be thought of as the destination, whereas formative methods are assessment of the process of getting there. Examples of summative methods include quizzes, tests, exams, but also kind of numerical things such as tracking attendance. We can also recognize that formative methods are more objective, whereas summative assessment methods are more subjective, whereas there's a precise measurement, and it's not really dependent on someone's mood or their interpretation of events. So the two research questions that we were trying to answer when we took on the study are presented here. We were interested in, when you're teaching an IBL class, what goals do instructors have for their students? What's the target that they're aiming at? What skills do they want students to learn, and what's a success? We were also interested in what methods do instructors use to assess the students' progress towards these goals? What's the assessment methods? So that's a brief overview of the study. We worked with 23 instructors in this study. We worked with interviews from 23 instructors. These 23 instructors are a smaller portion of a larger sample, 70 instructors who've been completing bi-weekly teacher logs online that they report on their concerns and their challenges they face. We ask instructors to rate their familiarity with IBL methods and to tell us the types of classes that they're teaching, or tell us the course they're teaching, and we classify those into groups. So we ask instructors to rate themselves as either beginner, novice, advanced, or expert familiarity levels, or lower division, upper division, or courses for future teachers. The 23 instructors that we selected covered a wide spread of these ranges, almost evenly split between beginner, novice, and advanced expert, well divided across the board. You can note that we have 23 instructors with familiarity levels and 29 instructors with regards to types of courses. It's because 6 of the instructors were interviewed twice, once in the fall of 2011 and again in last spring, 2013. So we have 29 interviews, but 23 instructors. These interviews were conducted over the phone. There were about 20 questions. They talked mainly about the views instructors have of IBL, how they go about implementing the method in their classroom. They also had questions that followed up on comments they made during the online logs. So these kind of got grouped together. For this study, we pulled out 5 questions that we'd like to talk about. What are the goals and skills? What are the goals? What are the skills you wish students to attain? That's 2 questions. And then, how do you know students learn? How do you measure this learning, and how do you give students feedback as what are they aiming at and how are they measuring that students are getting there, are the two research questions we were looking at. So as I said, the instructors filled out biweekly teacher logs. This data got grouped into the question protocol. The instructors were also asked during the interview to submit examples of homeworks they assigned, exams they conducted, the syllabus that they gave at the beginning of the semester. Some information was gathered. It was not really submitted uniformly, so extensive analysis wasn't possible. So we're just going to gray that out and pretend that data is there for another study at another time. So we took these 5 questions, and to analyze the responses, we read the responses, we summarized the responses to these 5 questions in particular. The summaries were used to write memos that we used they were more manageable rather than pages and pages of responses. We got short little clips. And themes emerged from these summaries. And within these summaries, within these memos, we looked for patterns between similarities and differences between the different instructors. And that's how we went about analyzing the data. So that our time can be interactive rather than me just lecturing and lecturing, I'd like to give you 2 minutes, let's say, maybe 3 minutes, to think individually and then to talk with your neighbors about these 2 questions. What are your goals for students in your IBL classes? And what assessment methods do you use when teaching an IBL class course? The data in this study came from 23 instructors that we interviewed over the phone, but it would be a shame to be in this position with you as an audience and not take advantage of this. So, discuss. Okay, so that's coming up on 3 minutes. I want to draw this to a close. Okay, so that's 3 minutes, folks. Let's return to group. We can clap at it. Okay, so that's 3 minutes. Here we go. Now I have a microphone. So before we get moving on, can I hear some contributions from various members who would like to contribute? You should use the microphone and you should give your name and your affiliation so that they have information. But what are some goals that instructors you have for your classes?
I think I have 2 main goals. One of them is to Zoe Dai from Alma College, sorry. So 2 goals. One is for students to participate in the math inquiry process and learn how to do it independently. And the second goal is for them, through that process, for them to build the self-confidence within themselves at their own level. So those are my 2 main goals.
So participation and confidence?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Kathy Crow from Salem State University. And in our group, we were saying that our goals are not necessarily that different from our non-IBL courses. So it might be problem solving, critical thinking, as well as the communication skills.
So problem solving, communication, critical thinking. One last one.
Dorin Dumitrashko from Adrian College. I'm also interested in the math content.
And what are some methods that people use to assess these goals or progress towards these goals?
Well, one method that I use is, Phil Hotchkiss, Westfield State University. One of the methods that I use, a large percentage of my final grade is actually based on class participation, and that's something I assess sort of at the end of the year after watching them, how well they work in their groups, how often they come to class, what are they contributing to the group, things like that, and it's sort of more of a holistic assessment at the end of the semester.
Brian Katz from Augustana College. We talked about aligning our big assessments with the skills that we were asking them to practice on a daily basis, so using things like oral exams.
So the problem with having you discuss these two questions is that doing so might lead to contradictions in the results I present. But I think that the goals that you shared, participation, confidence, problem solving, communications methods, content mastery, those were also mentioned, so that was nice. Grade participation, group work, kind of a holistic approach was also mentioned, so that was nice. We seem to be not going to embarrass ourselves, so we'll continue. We'll try to continue. We'll continue. So when we were looking over the results that instructors gave, their responses to these two questions about goals and skills, we found we could group the results into two categories, kind of the tangible things that could be measured easily, and the intangible. So we have Chad, who would like each student in his class to present at least one thing. Student presentations are a product. There's something that can be said on June 20th, you presented once, or that can be tallied over the course of the semester. On the other hand, we have Bruce, who gave kind of a more intangible goal. He'd like students to increase their confidence and to gain the ability to understand things and figure things out. I'm not really sure but it's not one that can be particularly measured. How do you rate that? So when we collect the data, common themes emerge, which is nice. The tangible goals and skills, we talked about communication, which got mentioned here today. We talked about content mastery, which got mentioned here today. These are precise, tangible objects that we can measure. We interviewed 23 instructors, but due to time limitations, we could only ask 22 of them about their goals and skills. So the sample size is 22 for this slide, and then the numbers in the parentheses indicate that 17 of the instructors spoke about clear communication being a goal. It was very common across the set. Some of the intangible goals we also saw today about confidence and positive attitude towards mathematics. These were less measurable, kind of less measurable. A third type of goal that we saw was overlapping. It overlapped the divide between tangible and intangible. And mathematical proficiency was a broad subject. These are math classes, so it stands to reason that 22 of the 22 instructors would talk about mathematical proficiency as being a goal for their students, which is good. However, given the breadth of this goal, since it's so wide and so many instructors were talking about it and so many comments got coded as mathematical proficiency, we felt we needed to further subdivide this. So we used the 5 strands that Kilpatrick et al. Put forth in adding it up as far as the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency: adaptive reasoning, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, productive disposition, and strategic competence. Adaptive reasoning was by far the most widely spread. 21 of 22 is almost all, to say the least. Some of these are quite tangible. Procedural fluency is something that we can test on an exam. We can say, use the quadratic formula, go. Sorry? Productive disposition is seeing a positive side of mathematics. Seeing that this is not, your teacher is not just saying, do this, but there's a purpose behind it. Yes. So, Adding It Up is a lovely book that you should all read. So procedural fluency is kind of a tangible object that we can measure, whereas productive disposition is similar to positive attitude. It's not really as measurable. So that's why this mathematical proficiency overlaps the two camps. And having this third category seemed appropriate. When we consider the second set of focus questions, the ones that asked about knowing and measuring and giving feedback, again, we see two categories that emerge: objective assessment measures and subjective assessment objective assessment methods and subjective assessment methods, sorry. Here we have Charles reporting that, that he draws from board presentations and the write-up students are doing in groups as kind of these objective things that you can classify and quantify and measure. On the other hand, we have Cedric saying that he counts on students smiling, laughing, proving theorems as an indication that they're having a good time and they're learning things, because they have to be learning things. If they weren't learning things, they wouldn't be happy and they wouldn't be smiling and laughing. Which is kind of a subjective measurement, to say the least. So that they're having a good time is completely dependent on the events of the day and doesn't necessarily transfer into paper. So the next thing to note is that the split between objective and subjective also kind of aligns with the split we saw earlier between formative and summative. Summative and formative. Objective, summative, subjective, formative. Yes. So 17 instructors spoke about exams. I should probably have also said that 18 instructors spoke about presentations. Student presentations on the front of the class, on the board, presenting their work, very common. And instructors reported this with happiness in their voice. Instructors also reported that at the end of the semester are kind of obligated to give exams, and that was said less enthusiastically. Homework assignments were also used by just over half the group. These homework could be given daily, it could be given weekly, it was used differently by different people, but this idea of continual practice was widely mentioned. Some of the more subjective methods are given here. We have instructors talking about their observations, talking about tracking class discussions, the participation in these discussions, whether questions are being asked and answered. These are subjective in that it's how the instructor is interpreting the event. And it allows the instructor, one instructor referred to it as developing a gut instinct of who knows what, who's learning what, who's engaged. So in summary, as we draw everything together, we note that IBL instructors use or have a wide range of goals and skills that they want students to develop. So some of these are communication, mathematical proficiency, developing a positive attitude. We found that these split into tangible, intangible, and kind of this overlapping notion. Overlapping in this case is instructors who had both tangible and intangible ideas and spoke of them without giving special emphasis to one and not the other. Far more instructors spoke about tangible goals rather than the intangible goals, so that's a nice thing to note. Only 3 out of the 22 spoke only about intangible goals. So, and then 6 gave this overlapping group. Similarly, with respect to the methods of assessment, there's this wide range of methods. Instructors spoke about using exams, having students give presentations, tracking the discussions that took place during the class. After the presentation, students would speak to kind of voice their concerns, voice their questions. The presenter would be expected to answer these questions. These kind of observational data that was being used to assess students. With these 3, there's a more even split. We have 8 objective, 8 subjective, and 7 mixed between the 2. So there isn't the same tendency. There were 13 tangibles and only 3 intangibles when we were looking at their goals. So when you work with data, things come out. Things emerge that you weren't necessarily looking for initially. We didn't have one of our research questions was not how do instructors feel about assessment? And yet, the interviewers or interviewees certainly spoke about this. So instructors spoke about their dissatisfaction with summative assessments, with grading in general. And 3 quotes that emerged that seemed important to highlight were these. I just give tests because I have to have some way to show somebody down the hall how students are doing in my class. That's why I do it. It's an obligation that I have to pass this on to the next people who are not in the class on a daily basis. The grade I got to give students at the end of the semester is a necessary evil of this process. It plays a role, but it's not necessarily a productive role. It doesn't contribute to students' day-to-day learning. And lastly, the grade is primarily used to reflect accomplishment, which is not necessarily the same thing as what did they learn. So that's separating, again, the difference between formative and summative, where formative is what did they learn? How can I adjust my teaching to better their understanding of the material? Whereas the summative is this accomplishment of summarizing knowledge into a single bit. So in super conclusion, we have both tangible and intangible goals for the students. IBL instructors use both objective and subjective methods to, objection should probably be objective, and subjective methods to assess their students. Given these differences, given the range in goals, given the range in methods, I think it's important to be clear about the goals and about the assessments. Be clear to both yourself as an instructor and to the students who are being expected to take up this cause, to interact in ways that they don't interact in a lecture-based classroom. They're not giving presentations. They're not, well, some things are the same, but they are taking exams. I guess that's the commonality. But students are expected to perform different actions in the IBL classes. And so being clear about the goals and about the assessment methods that you use are important to resolve this. So some implications of this: why should I care? I think it's interesting. I'm curious, so that's why I care. But I think that the findings of this provide support for instructors using IBL methods. So as new instructors go into the field, take up the method and approach this way of teaching, we can say these are things to think about. These are concerns to address. It's also important to prepare students because they are going to be expected to take this on, and letting your students know ahead of time what they're expected to do is always a nice thing. Also, there are a lot of pieces that go into IBL teaching, IBL courses. And so resolving questions about goals that you have for students, resolving questions about assessment methods that you're going to use to assess the students as they work towards these goals is useful and will help you in the long run. So I'd like to give thanks to Mr. Harry Lucas and the Education Advancement Foundation. I'd also like to give special thanks to the 23 instructors who took their time to be interviewed. We quoted last meeting that we had 30 instructors, and that's because seven additional instructors were interviewed for the first time this year, and that information needs to be, or those transcripts need to be A, transcribed and B, analyzed. So there will be work going forward. I'd like to thank the University of Michigan Rackham Graduate School for supporting our work, and the UROP program for giving us students who will do the work for us. I think that's about it. Any questions? Name and institution, affiliation.
Robert Mendez, University of Houston. Regarding your objective assessments, or the things you called objective assessments, did you verify that they were assessed objectively? You can take a presentation and say, yeah, that's an A. And that's kind of what I have seen.
So the coding was based on just on the responses that they gave. So it was an interpretation, which leads it to being a subjective interpretation of their words, of their phrasing. Certainly, additional data of gathering specific tests, contrasting, observing the 3 or 4 courses leading up to an exam, the exam, and the feedback that is given afterwards would be a wonderful piece of data. Just we don't have that at this time. Brian?
Brian Katz, Augustana College. The flip side, I was a little confused by your description of subjective. So are they things that behaviors that don't produce an artifact so you can't reproduce the assessment, or are they measurements of things that we that we think are fuzzy and poorly defined constructs, or?
So I think the example of tracking a student's smile is one that's, it doesn't produce a tangible thing.
So is that because the smile is a proxy for something else? Because a smile is a very tangible.
It is tangible.
Right? So, but it's because the smile is a proxy for positive attitude, which
Right,
means that they will
right.
have learned, right? So it's the fact that it's.
Right, and we're not sitting in the back of the room check marking who smiles, right? It's
Okay,
it's
so not systematic either.
I don't think it's systematic. Yes,
Okay.
I think that's the word that was missing. If you were being systematic, then it would move into the tangent or tangible objective of smiling. Yes. So it's not the happiness. It's the gut feeling part.
Hi, Sarah Marie Belcastro. I have a question about the third quotation you put up about what people didn't like about assessment. And when you described that quotation, you said you felt like it was a difference between summative and formative. Yeah? But I'm just wondering how the phrase, what did they learn, indicates formative. Because to me, what did they learn indicates summative. Because it's already happened and it's collecting. So then I was really confused as to what the idea, how could what did they learn differ from accomplishment?
That is an excellent point. So I think accomplishment, we can put accomplishment in the summative side of things. I mean, that's what it is. The what did they learn is.
That seems to me like the accomplishment. That what did they accomplish? That's what they learned.
Robert Mendez, University of Houston, again.
Thank you.
I run into this problem a lot, the difference between these two things. And what I see is students who will, let me turn this way. I'll see students who get, they will accomplish all of the homework goals, they will accomplish all the tests, but they haven't learned anything.
Right.
So they got all the grades, but they don't know anything.
Just the flip side of what, I'm Nina White from University of Michigan. The flip side of what was just said is I also have students who I hear brilliant insights from in my office hours and in class, and then bomb tests. So they have this grade which doesn't at all reflect things that I know they've learned and indicated in the classroom.
Vilma Mesa, University of Michigan. So I have helped coding some of this information. So as you can tell, I mean, these questions are great because we have been struggling a lot with the information that we get from faculty. So at some point we had something like concrete, lofty, vague. So we had all these labels to how faculty, so some faculty, for example, would tell us exactly what they did. So they have this rubric, and each rubric has 5 points. And so that for me is super concrete, even for presentations, even for group work. But some other faculty say, well, I just look at how they're working, and it seems that everybody's participating, and at the end, I feel like they have progressed a lot. So our goal with all these works, how do we help new faculty appropriate these methods? I cannot go and say, well, just look at how much they are smiling. I mean, sure, but that is, if I am thinking about a workshop for faculty to implement, I mean, I'm talking about Jeff. Jeff said, I'm going to start teaching this. I'm not telling him, just look at how much they smile, right? But like getting information from faculty about how they assign points, how they take into account what the students, the type of contributions that they're doing. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.